Hello, welcome to another week of Downbelow RPG developer discussions. I'm Ian Price.
And I'm Steve.
So this week we promised we would talk about three things. Let's get started with Yakuza.
Indeed. Please bear with me, by the way. I took a rather nasty spill on the ice a couple of days ago, and right now I'm on some pretty high-power muscle relaxants. So if I start to slip off to one side, Ian's going to catch me, for one thing. And for another, don't worry, it's perfectly normal. I am fine. I'm just a little less than lucid right now. So, with that in mind, let's have a wild ride. I promised we'd talk about Yakuza.
So, speaking of drugs, those are not the main thing the Yakuza specialize in.
It's true. Yakuza in the Nuevo Paradiso area actually specialize in something a bit more esoteric. The real thing the Yakuza specialize in is thrill. Specifically, the kind of experiences that you simply cannot get, thrilling experiences you simply cannot get through normal channels very easily.
Some of the things the Yakuza do are actually completely legal, or mostly legal. Just like in the real-world dealings of these particular kind of gangsters, they have their roots in a gambling culture, and gambling is actually pretty much legal. Some of the Yakuza or operations on Nuevo Paradiso would be otherwise legal gambling operations, except they don't exactly pay their fees.
Exactly. Similarly, some of the other thrills they provide just seem harmless in a legal sense. Why is it criminal to host an expedition climbing the seaward face of one of the wave break islands? I mean, except for the fact that it's off limits, it's not. But the Yakuza know the schedules and can grease the right palms for thrill seekers to climb the
They've found that it's more profitable for them to grease a couple of palms and do it illegally than to actually get permits.
Mostly because those permits aren't really issued unless you're a maintenance worker, because why would you ever? Which is kind of one of the major themes of what system exists in Nuevo Paradiso. One of the reasons that various things are illegal or hard to do is the mindset of, okay, why would you want to do that?
Bureaucratic neglect.
Yeah. Or bureaucratic not recognizing insanity as a real thing to do, because, yeah, it's very life-threatening to go climbing on the seaward face of the wave breaks. Why would anyone ever want to do that for anything other than fixing them?
It all ties back into the concept that the management of Nuevo Paradiso has, from the beginning, been based on an idea that Yggdrasil uses this island for their business purposes, and people are living here and trying to do normal people things with their lives. We don't quite comprehend where that fits into our spreadsheets.
So the Yakuza run a majority of the illicit gambling institutions. They sponsor the fights on Nuevo Paradiso. They sponsor the racing circuit on Nuevo Paradiso. There is an active... sorry, I lost my word there. Both literally and figuratively underground racing circuit.
This is both drift street racing. They actually have access to some gliders. They don't do powered air races, but they do glider events for their thrill-seeking customers, and they have parasailing as well.
Boat and jet ski races, foot races, parkour, especially through dangerous industrial areas. There are not a lot of live spectators to this, but it's filmed from multiple directions and often rebroadcast in 3D if you know the right people or in the right partners. When it comes to drugs, Yakuza do dabble in drugs. The drugs they dabble in are not really the hard drugs that will leave you a complete strung-out junkie. They dabble in drugs plus experiences. If you want to experience a rave while high out of your mind on something, whether it's something as relatively benign as ecstasy or something harder and more hallucinogenic, a Yakuza club is where you are likely to go. Also, you're more likely to gamble and put more money in their pockets while you are out of your mind.
This is also some place where the Yakuza and some of the other gangs have a point of contact, because one of the triads that operates on Nuevo Paradiso, which is a Chinese secret society / gang, is much more specialized in drugs, and they see the trafficking of illicit drugs as their territory. And so this is both a point of contact where they work with the Yakuza, and some of the Yakuza work through them to obtain product that their customers want at their raves, for example, and a point where they can sometimes come into conflict when someone in the Yakuza wants to put together one of these drug plus experience packages for a thrill-seeking customer and doesn't want the middleman from the other gang.
Similarly, when it comes to sex and prostitution, the Yakuza do not maintain regular brothels. That's not their thing. If you just want to get laid, there are other places, many of them legal, to do so. If you're looking for a niche experience of some sort, Yakuza is probably the place to go, because they cater to, they cater to thrills, they cater to experiences.
And warning, what I'm about to say may be uncomfortable for some people, but yes, the Yakuza will do some very bad things. They will, for example, kidnap people, including young people or children, or very specific profiles of people, so that they can set up this experience for their customers.
This is one of the reasons that they are undeniably a criminal organization. This is not... There may be individual Yakuza who are your classic gamer, but I'm a criminal, but I'm a totally good guy type of thing. We're not making any bones about that. These are bad people.
There is both within this organization. So the low level has a range from the worst human you can imagine to living a criminal lifestyle but actually a pretty decent person. At the top level, let's define a couple of the specific personalities that define this group.
Yep. Let's go with the very top first, the Oyabun. The Oyabun of the local Yakuza is a person who is, depending on how you look at it, either the literal worst person possible or a fairly decent person. They could actually be both. The Oyabun is a very numbers-oriented person. As long as the bottom line is not only steady but growing, as long as there are no major waves, as long as the company, well, in this case, the Yakuza Gumi, is profitable without risky outlays, and their operations are profitable without drawing undue attention, the numbers are good, everything's good, we're fine. The Oyabun, and the name of this Oyabun is something that has not been fully decided, so we're just leaving it at personality at the moment. The Oyabun is either a very decent person, because really all they deal with is paperwork and authorization, or an absolutely horrendous excuse for a human being, because across their desk floats proposals for horrible things on a daily basis, and they authorize it because the numbers look good and no one will ever miss these people anyway.
I was going to suggest that the Oyabun, we had talked about it being a female.
We had.
Who broke away from the traditional Yakuza so that she could run a family, which back in Japan they were not allowing because they're an organization with male-dominated roots.
This is true.
I was going to suggest, what if we call her Ms. Sato?
Sure. We'll call her Ms. Sato for this purpose.
So, Ms. Sato is, despite having parted ways with the families back in Japan, mostly a traditionalist herself. Although, from the standpoint of some of the most hardline traditionalist minds of the Yakuza, there are two things that they would take issue with besides her gender. One is that she uses people as trusted members of her gang who are not ethnically Japanese. Mm-hmm. And the second is that she pushed such an emphasis on money. The primary emphasis in the traditional Yakuza is family and insider versus outsider, money is important, but it is secondary.
What Sato has done here is actually, despite adhering to the traditions in a very superficial way, literally flown in the face of both of them. The insider, she herself is not an insider. She's not a male, and she is going for trusted members, inner circle members, even not just the occasional outside patsy. Inner circle members who are not ethnically insiders, who are not ethnically Japanese, and
she has chosen her sub bosses from people who made her the most money and cheated her the least.
Which, from a business perspective, makes absolutely perfect sense. But from a from a perspective of a criminal family with centuries of history, is absolutely unthinkable.
Now that she has a circle of insiders, she does stick fairly closely to the tradition of promotion through seniority, but her methods are a little bit more money-oriented, even in that respect. She calls her group the Paradiso Gumi. So it is a family, a Gumi of Yakuza, that she started on this island.
She not was named
originally,
after her, and that's big. Mm-hmm. Usually it's named after the family of the founder.
The family that she had experience with back in Japan was one of the oldest Yakuza clans, the Yamaguchi Gumi.
Yep. Which is actually kind of fun to say, but we're not going to get sidetracked into that.
So, we have told you quite a bit about the Paradiso Gumi and how they operate. So
in future, when we mention them, you'll know roughly what we're talking about.
Next week, when we define an organization, we will go into one of the gangs that we mentioned that we have not defined yet. We'll start talking about the Triads. We will talk about one of the two major Triads on the island next week. We'll decide at that time which one, but there are two really big ones.
And for those of you who are wondering, these relatively gentle, thrill-seeking criminals that we've described that have some horrendous qualities to them, but generally seem to be just businessmen above board, how can we use them? Don't worry. They're not just an underworld hospitality network. They're still heavily involved in traditional protection rackets. They're heavily involved in protecting their own territory. All of these illicit things that they do have to protect. So you've got plenty of room for classical underworld shootouts. You've got plenty of room for smuggling runs that may or may not end in bloodshed. You've got plenty of room for everything you would ever want to use criminals for, even though they're not financing heists primarily.
Although as far as Yakuza go, they're less likely to use guns, both because gun running is not a business that they get into at all, because one of the traditions that Ms. Sato does stick to is the Yakuza tradition that running guns is dangerous and bad for business. Stay out of it.
Yep.
They tend to thus not have very many guns and stick to other forms of armament, which is more convenient on Nuevo Paradiso anyway.
That's true.
But all gangs on Nuevo Paradiso are in that outer middle ring section of the island where so much of your Downbelow RPG action is going to take place. They are more likely to be the force for enforcing the peace that local people go to than the actual police, the island security, because they do things.
Exactly.
If you complain, if you have paid up your dues to your local Yakuza boss and you complain to him that somebody made trouble at your shop, then the local Yakuza boss will feel honor-bound to have his guys go rough somebody up for having made trouble at your shop.
In a traditional functioning city, the police would have problems with this sort of reverse vigilante justice? I'm not sure what you...
Vigilante. It's basically vigilante justice.
The point
But
is...
it goes back, in some ways, to a very, very old system of hue and cry, where vigilante justice was justice.
But the point is, while in most functioning cities, police would have a major problem with vigilante justice because there's just a system in place already, and we're supposed to be following the municipal justice system here. See also why Batman is not universally respected by the law enforcement in Gotham. In Nuevo Paradiso, there's an air of legitimacy to this because a lot of the Yggdrasil security and the national security and the international security that is present on this island do not want to stick their hands into private citizen business, and so sometimes tacitly and sometimes openly have acknowledged the local criminal syndicates as de facto peacekeepers, which is a very weird thing to do, and that's why a lot of it is done quietly, but it seems to be working to a point. Nobody has actually pushed hard enough to light a powder keg of syndicate violence that endangers things. There are plenty of people who say it's literally just a matter of time. On a daily basis, there are proposals for Yggdrasil security to step in and do something about it. I'm pretty sure they've got an office devoted just to handling, processing those proposals and telling them no in a variety of ways until they're resubmitted. But is it going to happen? Well, that's actually a question for future supplements or your game.
So, speaking of things that happen on the island, let's talk next about character origin stories.
Yep.
Because we just defined one group of people, and I am a member of the Yakuza gang is one possible character origin story, but there is a huge range of them. We're not going to talk very much about specific possible character origin stories here. Instead, let's talk about what qualities you're looking for in a character origin story.
Mm-hmm.
First thing is the character has to have a reason that they're not happy. They have to have something they're lacking, something they're wanting for, something they need. Because otherwise they don't make an interesting character in this setting.
Arguably, the character that has everything they need does not make that interesting a character in any setting, but that's more of food for thought than something we're discussing right here and now.
In this setting, it's pretty easy to define a character who has everything they need and is content. Your average citizen of most countries of the world, no matter how totalitarian or not, the average citizen doesn't really interact with what makes things oppressive or not based on the way the government is running things. They're mostly fed and clothed and housed, and so they don't see much of a problem. They're basically all Bilbo Bagginses.
Or in historical things, it's the bread and circuses factor.
Exactly. Now, to take Bilbo Baggins and make him into an adventurer, you have to show him that there's something he's not getting from sitting at home being content. And this could be the idea that adventure is something for its own sake. Or it could be, and this is where most character concepts would tend to go in this setting, something goes wrong.
The basic themes can be described as follows. There are 5 of them. The 5 basic themes of need that I've identified so far are, first, there's loss. Loss is very straightforward. You had something, and you no longer have something. Loss is separate from the next one, theft, in that loss is something was destroyed or taken or is no longer there, and it needs to be found or replaced. Theft is a specific form of loss, but it's different enough that it gets its own second category, because theft indicates that someone or some organization has taken the thing or the quality from you, and you are searching to specifically get it back.
Loss focuses on coping with and or replacing, whereas theft focuses on retrieval.
The third is often described easily as drive. This is a drive generally to improve something. A drive is basically a sense of dissatisfaction with where things are, and a goal to change where you are in relation to things. This can be anything from as vague as a local improvement drive. I don't like the way people live in this slum, and so I'm going to make things better by any means necessary. Or even, I don't like the way my family lives in their one-room apartment, so I'm going to make things better for them. Or it can be a very specific drive. I will clean up crime in the streets of Gotham is a drive. He is dissatisfied with where things are, and so he is driven to change things.
Even I want to get back home, I'm lost and stranded is a drive.
Although
that's also a little bit of
number 4. Number 4 is stranded. If you find yourself out of place, maybe you have not actually lost anything. It's all there at home, in theory. Nothing's been stolen from you. You just find yourself, for whatever reason, out of place. That's a stranded origin. An example of this would be the foreign national who lands in an airport, and before he has a chance to exit the country, something happens to his visa. In the airport, he's fine. In fact, there's a movie about this. I'm forgetting the title at the moment, but there is actually a movie about this.
I think it's actually called Terminal.
I think it may be called The Terminal. I think it's The Terminal.
The Terminal.
Where there's an issue, some issue with paperwork, and the national is not allowed to leave the airport because if they leave the airport to the country that the airport is located in, they're illegally emigrating if they go through customs that way. If they were to get back on a plane, they don't actually have a visa to re-enter their country because of the same diplomatic snafu. And so they're literally stuck there in a bizarre microcosm of society that is the international airport. The same thing can happen in Downbelow. You can end up somewhere and not have the legal standing or the monetary standing or the wherewithal to either complete your journey or to return home, and you can end up stranded. You will note, stranded is kind of a mix of the first 3, but it is a very definite separate category, enough that it got its 4th. And the reciprocal of stranded is one that I call belonging. Belonging is one where, unlike being stranded, you already belong to a misfit society, such as the Yakuza we talked about earlier. If your character begins play as a member of the Yakuza, you are involved in the Downbelow adventure by the fact that you're already embedded in the Downbelow society. You may have everything you need. You may not have actually lost anything. You might not have anything stolen. You might have a drive to uphold the principles of your syndicate or the profit of your syndicate. You're not stranded. You might have been stranded before you belonged, but the point is now your character origin is one of belonging.
Even if you have none of the other 4, being a member of that group gives you sufficient ties to that world that you can get drawn into the stories that happen in Downbelow.
Those are the 5 major character origins that I've identified.
So I'm going to take a moment with those origin categories having been listed to give some examples of... First, I'm going to give some examples of, here are some easy, straight-down-the-middle origin stories that clearly work in the Downbelow setting, and I'm going to relate them to those things. And then I'm going to give a couple examples of, so here's a problem origin story, and I'm going to kick each problem origin story to you so that you can clean it up and make it fit.
All right, we've got a few minutes. Let's do this thing.
So, the first, straight down the middle, this easily works, as we've discussed, is I am a member of the Yakuza gang on Nuevo Paradiso. I was born here on the island, and I joined the gang when I became a teenager, and I may not be a teenager anymore, or maybe I still am a teenager and I'm a new, young, fresh face, but either way, I'm a member of the gang, and I basically have been a part of this life for my whole life. So that's part one. That, straight down the middle, perfectly works.
Yep.
Another character concept that works really well and can fit perfectly into the game is I came here to make my fortune, and then there was a disaster, and the valuable cargo I was shepherding that was going to go up the space elevator, and maybe I personally owned it, or maybe I was riding herd on it for a company I work for, but there was a disaster. It was all destroyed or ruined somehow, and now I'm either fired or penniless, and this is a combination of lost and stranded, because here I am on Nuevo Paradiso, and my life is in shambles, and what am I going to do? And a third example of straight down the middle character concept that could be built into a Downbelow RPG game quite easily is here I am on Nuevo Paradiso. I am ex-army, but there's no wars being fought. And I'm an ex-convict, but my record was expunged because of my military service. But here I am with a skill set that doesn't fit into normal life. And I don't have a place to be myself, to do the things that I need to do. And this combines a bit of the drive to do some things that society doesn't normally allow me to do, and a bit of stranded. It's not that I'm actually physically stranded here on Nuevo Paradiso, it's that I'm an outsider. It is the opposite of the belonging. I don't belong in normal society, even though I don't exactly belong to the outsider society.
Yep.
I fit them better than I do the regular society. So those are some straight down the middle. These character concepts could easily be worked into a Nuevo Paradiso-based Downbelow game, and any of the plots that we've talked about in previous episodes, and pretty much any of the plots that we talk about in episodes to come for how you're going to plot things, would work very well with those concepts. So here's a couple of problem concepts that you might not think would work immediately, and I'm going to kick these one by one to Steve and see how Steve makes them fit into the setting. So,
and we'll make them fit. Well, not guaranteed, but we'll do our best to make them fit.
They may end up unrecognizable from the original thing, but we'll cut them down to size. So, what if a player wants to be rich and famous and come from a position of power?
Well, the question is, does the player want to be actively rich and famous, or does the player want to have the benefits of having been rich and famous? What does the player want in this case?
Let's say that they are trying to play a character who is, when they play them, rich and or famous.
Well, having either resources or fame is not necessarily forbidden, and not necessarily a bad thing. There are plenty of problems that can lead one of these people to be down below. The simplest possibility is really the easiest possibility is let this be a temporary character. The character will appear for a story. The character will be swept into the down below lifestyle. At the end of the story, the resolution will either have the character find their origin in down below, probably losing some of their riches or fame in the process, or resolve their situation that had them stuck in down below and drift back out into normal society. An example of this could simply be one of those various thrill-seeking rich kids that frequent Yakuza places gets embroiled in Yakuza trouble, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, has to resort to extra-legal means to get themselves out of it because they can't really involve their family in this directly. That would mean, among other things, possibly admitting that they were wrong, etc., etc., etc. It's on them to resolve it, and they can't go through normal means. At the resolution of the story, however it pans out, it's possible that everything goes back to status quo, and everything going back to status quo would mean that the character drifts out. If the player wants to keep playing that character, the player has to keep concocting reasons for the character to be involving themselves in down below, and the more frequently the character involves themselves, the more likely they'll find themselves stuck.
And even if they're not stuck, the more often the player and the character are concocting reasons for themselves to stay in this, the more it starts to look like a drive to do these things.
Exactly. Alternately, the player and character can resolve it in such a way that there is a loss or a theft. The theft might get them involved, the loss might come as a result of the adventuring, or eventually even just belonging. It's theoretically possible to have resources aplenty and still end up part of the down below society. How else do you suppose people like the leaders of the syndicates, who are again de facto governments in their territories, get along? They're certainly not scraping by for table scraps. So this character would, if they want to be legitimately rich and or famous, probably end up leveraging some of their resources in such a way as to become either associated with or a de facto minor syndicate leader, opening up a whole new angle of the game for people.
And if you as GM are comfortable with the player in question running a minor criminal organization, that is a reasonable, rich, and powerful character concept that you could have a player take over. Just remember that just because they run things doesn't mean things go any more perfectly for them than for any other character.
And that's actually a very big point. The problem with being rich is not that you have a lot of money. The problem with being rich is that players assume money opens all doors. First off, money does not open all doors, especially digital money. There are plenty of places that digital money, digital script, is not exchangeable for resources that people might want. There are plenty of times that the resources are simply not available. In D&D terms, I don't care that you have enough gold. You cannot walk down to the corner store and buy a Holy Avenger sword. It is not for sale. It is not easily available.
You have to get to a really big city that has a big enough temple that they could produce one, and they might not have one ready. They might be able to produce one for you, but it might take months.
And basically, even if you're as rich as Bruce Wayne in the down below setting, that doesn't solve anything. It didn't solve it for Bruce Wayne. Look what happened to him. So really, the question is, when someone wants to play a rich and or famous character, the real question to the GM is, okay, so what is this character's story? Is the story simply that they're rich and famous? Well, that's actually kind of boring. If the point is to play a wish fulfillment fantasy, that's boring in this context. If the character is also rich and famous in addition to what they want to do, that's suddenly interesting, and the only difficulty is making certain that the riches and or fame do not smooth over the story to the point of having cake and eating it too. Oh my god, look at my tragic backstory, but I don't mind. I drive 7 Porsches at once and eat the finest caviar at every meal.
So let's look at least one other problematic character concept real quick. So let's go with the I want to be an elite operative for a government or for Yggdrasil, or I want to play in the Down Below game, but I want to be currently connected deeply in a major government or organization.
That one is actually at the same time both easier and harder. It really requires some cooperation between the GM and player to establish this, but the fact of the matter is, if you are involved with the Down Below side of the setting, you're tarnished. You are tainted. You cannot be a shining star in your organization if you routinely deal with this. This is not always something so overt as saying that you've got mud all over your resume, but these people are distasteful. Even the good people down below are working outside the system. If you're assigned to work for them, if your government or your organization is assigning you to work with these people, the most common way that someone does this is actually in the guise of a social worker. Social workers are not glamorous people. They are wonderful people. Well, most of them are wonderful people. Their job is to go around and try to improve the lives of marginalized, minority, hard on their luck, transient, and otherwise misfits. Even in today's world, that's in theory their job. Their job is to improve the loss of their constituency.
The Scottish cop from Haltingstate is a great example of someone who is in an official organization, but deals with what we would call the down below economy.
The point is, though, that if the player wants to play the card of I'm an official government or corporate operative who deals with these people, the most likely place they will deal with them is in the decidedly unglamorous, decidedly non-elite, non-military, non-intelligence position of social work. The players are not going to want this if what they're saying are the words elite operative. If that's the case, then we're into a different realm altogether here. The elite operative involved in Down Below is going to come in, again, one of two flavors. They're going to come in the flavor of a driven operative who is, to borrow the trope, they're a maverick cop who doesn't play by the rules. This is bad. This is very bad. The rules are why it works. If you are an operative in the security forces at a reasonable level, not an elite black ops level, and I mean elite as in fictional, because even black operatives in declassified documents have to operate by specific standards, especially in reporting. If you are breaking the rules, this is trouble, and this will lead to loss. Oh wait, look, there we go. So if you're engaging yourselves with Down Below, you're probably breaking rules, because generally speaking, the police who deal with them and the operatives who deal with them are riot troopers sent in to break up riots, and in cities that are not Nuevo Paradiso, shock troopers sent in to clean out and cleanse ghettos. So we're talking about stormtroopers there, not elite James Bond people. On the other hand, if you are an elite operative that is routinely tasked to deal with that, you are probably an undercover operative, which means you have a cover story, which means that your story is not that you're an elite operative. Your story is that you're a stranded businessman whose visa was denied, so that you can end up getting in good with Yakuza, so that you can end up accidentally falling in over your head, so that you can end up owing some favors, oh no, so that you can end up in contact with whatever it is you are sent to do. When your job is done, there are two options. One, you will be extracted, you will be thoroughly debriefed, you will disappear for a while and emerge somewhere with a new identity so people don't remember you, and your story is over. Or two, you will not be extracted because you will have been compromised, you will have lost your standing as an elite agent, and oh look, you're in Down Below now, because you are a deniable asset.
And you get denied.
And that's the big thing that people need to know about Down Below. Even in cultural media, there is not really a lot of glamour in military operations. There isn't. The glamour is in the entrepreneur side these days. Sure, there's still the stories of the heroic starfighter pilots and space pirates, and James Bond is always going to be popular, and war movies especially of past wars. But the emphasis on the military in popular culture in the Down Below era is very definitely one of public service. It's very definitely one of people serving other people. finishing out the thought, if you're an elite operative, you're not doing this for glamour, you're doing it to do a job.
So, we've run to a pretty long time. The one thing I want to focus on from what was said in handling that specific example is the idea of loss as a potential loss instead of an already suffered loss in a character concept. This can be generalized to a lot of different character concepts, where rather than something that you've already lost, like a loved one who's already been killed, or a job that you've already lost, one of your motivating factors could be the fact that you are in an untenable or tenuous situation where something bad looks like it probably will happen, or could happen, or is about to happen.
There is that. There's very definitely that.
So, we have gone on for plenty of time for this week.
Okay.
And next week, we will, as mentioned earlier, be dealing with one of the Triads as our organization to stat out. And we will be talking about plotting out scenes, since we didn't have time for that this week.
There we go.
Thanks for watching, and if you fall through the cracks, maybe you'll end up down below.